The internet was seen as an enormously beneficial tool for enhancing democracy. And I should say at the outset that we can't forget the important role social media has played in democratic movements, particularly in Egypt in 2011 through the Arab Spring. So the spread of democracy in Egypt and North African nations that, you know, obviously wasn't entirely successful, but is cited again and again as being an example of where social media was mobilized for driving democratic movements, and also more recently the Me Too and the Time's Up movement in relation to sexual assault, sexual harassment, has again demonstrated the value of social media for very quickly galvanizing supporters of particular causes very quickly and on a mass scale. So the internet, the early days of the internet and social media in relation to its democratic potential, it was argued that digital technologies would give us direct access to political leaders. So being on social media would mean politicians would no longer need or be able to hide behind political advisors or sort of those flak catchers, if we go back to our module on media, politics and power. And because of the two-way interactive nature of digital media, it would make it easier for participants, ordinary citizens, to take part in the political process. Now, as I've said, that we have seen instances of that, and we have seen quite, you know, dramatic instances of that. However, in many cases, the problems of real democracy, the problems of physical democracy, research suggests are mirrored and amplified online rather than resolved. So the nature of online communication, because it can be anonymous, because it is once removed from face-to-face interpersonal communication through the use of technology, it encourages political extremism, it is argued. It allows us to engage in discourse that we may not necessarily engage in a face-to-face situation. And we've seen very dramatic examples of that across the globe in relation to a whole range of things, in relation to terrorism, in relation to Brexit. And it's fair to say that President Donald Trump is a very good and obvious example of that kind of political extremist language that gets used in online platforms. And online democracy, the move of politics onto the internet, has in some ways democratized political speech, but it's also created new political elites. So bloggers, journalists interacting with each other, it's broadened it out, because a lot of bloggers are, you know, everyday people who now have a platform to analyze information, express opinions. But political discussion still tends to be on the internet, kind of a group of insiders talking to one another, rather than having had any real broadening of scope. Now, in the media, politics and power module, we looked at the increasing corporate control of social media and how it's really resulted in homogenized content. So if one of the democratic potentials of social media was to give us greater diversity of content, on one hand, it's been successful because there is a lot of material out there. The challenge is that you need to go looking for it, and that there is very little difference if you have a look at the graphs, which are part of this section of the module. We'll see that there's very little difference between the most popular online forms of news and legacy news sources. So what the news and the information we tend to look at online tend to be very similar, if not identical, to the forms of news that we might read in a newspaper, watch on television, or listen to on the radio. And there's very little difference in that trend across age groups. So the youngest age group in the graph, Generation Z, if you like, as it's called on the graph, show a slight difference in their news preferences. The Daily Mail and BuzzFeed are a little more popular for younger age groups, but overall there's not that much difference between the different generations. And also, if we look at the most popular websites in Australia, you'll see that they're largely corporate and commercial. There are a few differences there, but overwhelmingly the most popular websites in Australia are corporate and commercial, and that is a trend that's mirrored across the world also. So this brings us to two very important ideas that do circulate not only academically in discussions of social media and the internet, but also in everyday conversation. So the idea of echo chambers and filter bubbles has kind of trickled down into everyday conversations about the internet. So echo chambers, when we talk about echo chambers, we're referring to the idea that people select information according to our existing preferences and beliefs. So for example, if you're a Liberal voter, you will select information that tends to support those beliefs. And that goes back to a number of the theories that we spoke about in the last module in relation to media effects. So the idea that we will gravitate towards information that we already believe in and accept as true, and kind of which confirms existing personal preferences, is what we talk about when we're talking about an echo chamber. So the idea that you just keep hearing the same ideas again and again and again. And that's related to the filter bubble. So the filter bubble is kind of a social media phenomenon that suggests, because of commercial pressures and the increasing need for social media platforms such as Facebook in particular to generate revenue, these companies prioritize information in our news feeds which algorithms show are more likable and shareable. So we simply get the information that we want, or the information that confirms our existing beliefs on social media. And there's very little opportunity for seeing, hearing, reading alternative views. Now, there are two consequences of that. Obviously, we only receive information that appeals to our beliefs, existing beliefs. And that means we miss out on that open debate that we have stressed in this unit that is so central to the effective functioning of a democracy. But it also, the second consequence of echo chambers and filter bubbles is that it becomes very easy to avoid politics altogether, because if you are only getting through social media feeds which have been sort of algorithmically primed to give you the information that you want and are likely to share, you miss out on the information that you might need. So if you demonstrate that you're not necessarily that interested in politics, chances are you are not going to get political news or economic news or news about other topics that could be useful to know about, but because you haven't expressed an interest in them, you're less likely to get that information via social media. So it becomes very easy to avoid politics according to the theory of echo chambers and filter bubbles. Now, whether echo chambers and filter bubbles are real or not is a bit of a vexed question. So it's kind of a yes and no argument. Now, we know that the tactics of companies like Cambridge Analytica and the political polarization of media outlets create the possibility for echo chambers to exist. And, you know, when I talk about the political polarization of media outlets, I'm talking about both the left and the right. So, you know, you could criticize The Guardian, for argument's sake, as being, you know, biased towards a left-wing perspective, as you could Sky News and other News Limited publications for being biased towards the right. So there's kind of a polarization of media outlets, which we've spoken about, that do suggest the possibility of echo chambers and filter bubbles playing a role in influencing the information we receive and the subsequent formation of ideas. However, research into the actual occurrence of echo chambers and filter bubbles demonstrates that they're not that prevalent or not necessarily that powerful for two main reasons. So first of all, people get information from a range of sources. So while we might use social media to catch up on the news quickly during the day, on the commute, to and from work or to and from uni, when we're sort of bored and just flicking through our social media feeds, we do get information from other sources. So we're not cut off from reading newspapers, from listening to the radio, from talking to other people. So the way we develop opinions is actually quite multifaceted. Even more so when you factor in the idea that people, we as audiences, are actually very critical consumers of media. We don't always necessarily blindly accept what it is that we see on social media. In fact, you know, we are quite good, if not perfect, and we're going to get on to this point in a minute in relation to the ability of social media users to detect fake news, to detect lies, that idea that we are critical, skeptical, cynical consumers of media also acts as a barrier against the power of echo chambers and filter bubbles.